Welcome to the Kaiser Karel Hall. This is one of the other beautiful seminar rooms in the Schloss here in Trumau. And I welcome you, dear students, who know this hall very well from your classes here. I welcome all others who are viewing this live stream. Of course, our dear faculty and staff, and those other guests who are tuning in today. And it is a great joy, as I announced last week, to welcome next to me our Dean, Dr. Bernard Dorna, with whom I will be having a conversation today, continuing on the theme that we have, especially during the past couple of weeks, been discussing. And that is an analysis of this corona crisis. How did we get here? Why did our societies react to this crisis in the way they did? And I would say the most important question, what are we called as Christians to do, or better to say, how should we as Christians respond to this situation, to these new challenges, to the new realities we see? Because I am convinced that really we have a calling here, and that the world is, so to say, waiting for Christians around the globe to stand up, to take responsibility. As I've stressed, in whatever way you and I are called to do so. Some through a more contemplative life, through more prayer, others through action, others through a combination of that, yet others through more and deeper study to prepare, etc. There are different callings in different ways, but the fact is that we have to respond to this global crisis and that we have something to offer to the world. So it's a great honor for me that Dr. Dorna is with me today, and I have prepared two questions for him that very much also relate to his field of study and his field of specialization. And maybe I may briefly, for those of you who do not know Dr. Dorna, first ask you, Dr. Dorna, very briefly to tell what is your field of study and specialization and teaching at the ITI.
Yes, the field of study, my specialization is, of course, biblical studies, and especially Hebrew, because I did, besides my theological studies, an intensive studies of Jewish sources, Jewish theology, and I read the Old Testament in Greek, and I also teach Hebrew, modern Hebrew, and the Old Hebrew language. And the field of the prophets is my specialized field. The prophets of Israel, from whom Christ says that if you read the prophets really with your heart, and Moses and the Psalms, you will get an understanding who I am.
And exactly, that is the reason why I invited Dr. Dorna, not only because I said before to you, he's a very dear friend of mine and a much valued colleague with whom I have worked for many years now, but it's exactly speaking about the prophets that we are going to focus our attention a little bit on today. And as an introduction to my first question that I'm going to ask Dr. Dorna, I have a quote from one of my favorite authors of fiction. His name is Michael O'Brien. He's a Canadian Catholic writer who has written some truly excellent and in fact prophetic books, all of whom I have read. And in one of his books, which is called Theophilus, he writes the following: "There is no greater imprisonment of the mind than the illusion that it is free and superior. The prisoner who does not see his own chains feels no need to break them." Now, this is quite a provocative quote I have for you, but that's deliberately. to make us think, to really make us think, and that is very important in these times that we live. Are our minds really free? And how do we deal with the situation? So I have a question to ask Dr. Dollner. Bernhard, why do you think our societies have reacted to this virus, to this pandemic, in such a self-destructive way? And you remember from my previous sessions, we have spoken about that our societies have reacted to this crisis in a very self-destructive way, seemingly only in fear, focusing on short-term solutions, and failing to have a vision for the long term. That seems to be so much missing in all that is going on in response to this crisis. What is the long-term vision? How do we deal with this new challenge on the long term? And we've discussed during the past couple of weeks various reactions that we have seen that are puzzling. So why is there, seems to be, at least not publicly known, a long-term vision, a vision for the long term? So my question to you, Bernhard, is, what does the history of mankind, read through the prophets of the Old and the New Testament, tell us in response to this question?
This is a very great question which you give to me. What comes into my mind, this surprising moment when we were confronted with this crisis. It came overnight. This is something which also is represented in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Crises are coming overnight, surprisingly, and people are not prepared for that. The people are not prepared for that. What is the reason for that not being prepared? The prophets give an answer to that. Because they have changed their perspectives already long before their perspectives of life. That means they have made their needs to their ends. Their needs to their ends. What are the needs? What I mean with that? This is progress. This is success. This is fulfillment of life, a good life. Mm-hmm. All these aspects, but not what are the main questions, namely, what is the meaning of life? The goal of life, the end of life. This question was lost, forgotten. And the crisis always reminds us to come back to that questions which are so important. What makes a human life really worth to live? Worth to live. Into my consideration comes the statement of Camus. Camus once wrote in his book, the most important theological question is suicide. Because you don't have a meaning in life. You organize your life, but it is not with meaning. And what is the answer of the Bible? Dedication, giving your life. What is worth to give your life for? And this is in the Bible, of course, the dedication to the Creator, to the Redeemer. And the prophets are always reminding us, we have to return, we have to come back to the questions which are not so much determined of needs which we have, but of ends. So we have to transform something. The ends should become our needs, the great questions of life. To be born, to die, what means revelation? What is the mystery of a human being?
Mm-hmm. There's one thing that has really bothered me in these weeks, and actually yesterday, as you in the meantime know, I go back and forth between home and Truma every day by bike, and yesterday I actually stopped to take some pictures of large advertisements that we see overall. Everywhere. We see these large advertisements. And one of them says in German, Schau auf dich, bleib zu Hause. It says, look only at yourself, stay home. And I took a picture of that because I thought, in many years, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, probably I will have a conversation with my grandchildren about this time, and they will ask, grandfather, what tell us about this time? In the same way, you remember that of our live stream last week when I told you stories of my parents and my grandparents in the Second World War. I expect that in many years my grandchildren will ask me the question, well, how was it, the corona pandemic? And I think I will show them that picture, and I will say them that I was taken aback, surprised to see these big advertisements everywhere through the country. Think of yourself, stay home. Now, of course, we understand that there are many good, thoughts behind that. But it says a lot, Bernard, and that's why I'm mentioning it. It says a lot about what you're saying. Yes. Because the aspect that is missing there is this generosity, as you were speaking about, of giving our lives, as Christ also says, giving our lives for our friends. Now, of course, we don't want anybody to do stupid things. But one of the things in this crisis that has disturbed me is that the narrative has so much been, think of yourself, think of your health, stay home, don't talk to anybody, don't be with anybody. But that goes so contrary.
Yes. And
maybe you can say a few things about that. It goes so contrary to the DNA
yes.
of us as Christians, in general,
yes.
as humans, because we are a people that live in community. And it seems that this balance
yes.
has been lost in our response. Because yes, we need to be careful, we need to take measures. Once again, as I've said before, I'm not criticizing individual measures. But it seems the balance has been lost between this sense of the human being living in community and needing community on the one hand, and on the other hand, taking necessary precautions. How would you look at then that if we look at great famines or great plagues in the Old Testament? How did the prophets deal with that?
Yes, first of all, one sentence to that what you said before, that we are so self-centered to preserve our own lives. The deeper you come in contact with the truth, with the real, with the truth, I'm convinced, the more you are ready to give your life for it. Because the main question for a person who loves, this is the message of the prophets, is that you're ready to give the life for that. And our Father, the prayer, our Father, begins with this beautiful sentence, hallowed be thy name. Sanctification of the name. In the biblical tradition, the Jewish tradition, sanctification of the name means to give your life. To give your life.
Like so many doctors and nurses are doing.
Yes.
We hear little about them. But
yes, such people who give their life because they have seen something of the truth. The deeper you understand the truth, the more you come to that comprehension. Meaning of life is deeply rooted in giving, even your physical life. This can happen. This is not forcing what I say, but it is the truth. It is the truth of the Bible. Christ says it. No greater love is a person who gives his life for his friends. This is it. Yeah, what I see with what are the famines, the plagues? This is so interesting. I looked again in the book of Exodus. We have here the 10 plagues. Moses in confrontation with Pharaoh, 10 plagues. They are coming in that moment when the Jewish people are asked by God and guided by Moses to leave a place of idolatry. This is Egypt in the perspective of the Bible. 10 plagues are coming in order to convert, or to at least to correct or to challenge Pharaoh. Pharaoh is a person, is a ruler, and he has also a noble ancestry. He is already seen as a god. And what happens by these plagues? The 4 the 4 first plagues, there's a competition between, this is the blood plague and the other plagues, a competition between Pharaoh and Moses. And the wise people of Pharaoh, magicians, who are able also, as Moses, to have a remedy against the plague. But at the end, they have to give in. A plague is, in the Bible, a kind of probatio, a test. It is a test. It is a test where we should come into contact with God again, or to reject Him. Or to reject Him. Pharaoh rejects Him. It is said that even God hardened his heart. It seems to be that is the plan of the Bible, that evil needs to be eradicated out of the world. But plagues are a test. And I think what we have with this corona, this is a test. A test especially for us Christians. How we react to that, how we answer to that. What is our answer to that pandemic? Suddenly we became one family of manhood. No one can protect himself anymore. A great confusion comes, a perturbatio. This is much more than a confusion. A perturbatio means in Latin a disturbance of the whole system of life. We cannot handle it. And then we have the scientists who gave us permanently new solutions for this virus, but at the same time, an opposite opinion. We get a confusion also in the mind. What is our reaction to that? Yes, and this is the biblical perspective to that.
Let's talk about that reaction to that, because I think that is of course a very important point. And as a practical point, please, you can already send in your questions and comments through the chat function now. You don't have to wait, so that they're ready once we come to that point. I would like to speak a little bit, what is that response? What is our response to that test? I think it's very beautifully said. It's a test we are going through. This pandemic is a test for us, and as Bernhard says, specifically for us Christians. And my next question I would like to again introduce with a quote, again from Michael O'Brien, this one from another of his books, a book called Island of the World. And there he says something, and it's one of my absolute favorite quotes, which I've often used, and it never fails to inspire me. He says, "A messenger is in his words. If the messenger is truly himself, his life is his primary word, and his spoken words bear his life. His spoken words bear his life. He learns to be this when he has discovered that a man can give to others only what he truly is." Very powerful thoughts he expresses here. So my question, Bernhard, is the following. What do you think is the calling of young Christians, specifically included ITI students and graduates, in these times of global upheaval, where virtuous leadership is so desperately needed? What is the calling of young Christians in the face of this test you speak about, in the face of this perturbatio, where you speak about, very well explained, where you say there's more than confusion. It's perturbatio. I mean, all these different opinions and contradicting, etc.
Yes,
what is the calling of the young Christian here?
It seems to me that we have, first of all, to focus our mind, to focus our intentions, and to concentrate on the essential issues, not to be confused. We have to make a kind of fasting, a kind of fasting from the many, many impressions which we get from outside, in order to recollect our intentions and our intellect and our emotions to the truth of our tradition, to the truth of our Christian life. We have to invest, and this is the moment which God gives us, that we have a kind of emptiness here. So we cannot do everything what we could do before. This emptiness, this vacuum, is a time of encounter of Christ. This is important, that we find the right way how we need to act in the future. Mm-hmm. A kind of recollection is first of all necessary, and to withdraw from any confusion. This we have penetrated. This is not the way which we need to go. We are too intelligent for that. Mm-hmm. Too intelligent. But let us find now the means of Christ. The means of Christ, what Christ offers to us to solve such problems. And this is related to a prayer life, but also to a strong intellectual life. In my understanding, it is necessary that we rediscover the intellectual sources of our tradition in order to give answers to the world also, to find the right words for that what is needed. What I miss today is that we give not enough answers to that what happens. Mm-hmm. We give a comfort, we give a kind of peace to people who are in difficult situations. We have a social dynamic to support people. But there is a spirit here, an intellectual power which works here. And we need to give another impact. And I really want to encourage young people to use all their intelligence, their energy, to learn, to study, especially because I'm connected with a school, and to rediscover the sources of our tradition, which give us the means to inform our intellect, inspired by a supernatural power, a supernatural insight, as the great tradition did it. And young people will find a way to give the right answers to the situation. They will be strong.
It's beautiful what you say, and it touches my heart, first of all, because interestingly, in the responses I've been getting from students, this has been the main message, that you say it very beautifully. In order for us as Christians to be able to give answers, we need to spend more time in recollection and in prayer.
Yes.
So in order that we can use our intellects, our God-given intellects, to formulate those answers. Yes. But we can only do that when we have the time for recollection, for prayer, for thought, in this world that is, of course, continuously pushing us to hurry and to hurry more, And of course, this pandemic has forced us all to a time of recollection, because suddenly we were all sitting at home, or all our meetings are cancelled. It's the same with me. I usually have a day full of meetings. Now I have little meetings. Of course, you have some of the online meetings, but much little. And yes, indeed, you get a lot of more time for recollection. So I think there's an essential point that you give there. In order for us to be able to give answers as Christians to this crisis, we need to make sure that we have that time of recollection, of prayer, so that we can use our intellect.
Yes.
And that's absolutely essential, because that also brings us back to the aspect of transcendence. Because, of course, the way our world is dealing with this crisis shows that the world we live in has become incapable of seeing the transcendent dimension.
Yes.
And that is why also the responses have been as they have been. That's why this larger vision that I spoke about at the beginning is failing, and only short-term fixes are being considered, because our world lacks this transcendent dimension. And that is where I am convinced, and Bernhard says that so beautifully, that is where I am convinced we as Christians come in. Because we can provide these answers. We can provide these answers through the tradition that has been given to us, that gives answers to the problems of today. And you always say that when we speak about the method of learning here at the ITI, by studying the great masters, we actually find concrete answers in their writings that were writings of 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago or 500 years ago, but they have answers to the questions of today. Yes. But that requires us to engage our intellect through recollection, through prayer, and through study. Quite essential. So I think we have a very beautiful rounded conclusion here of yet another way of looking at what is required from us as Christians. So I would now, looking at the time, like to move to the questions here and see if there are already some questions that came in. Yes, there is a question from Gintas.
Oh.
Gintas asks Professor Dollner, is this pandemic, can it be seen as a call to repent? That is a classical message in such situations in the Bible, as far as I understand.
Thank you for this beautiful question, Professor Bartoszka. Yes, it is metanoin asked. We can give the answer. This is important. Such a pandemic asks Christians to return to God. We have to ask ourselves, because we are involved, we belong to the body of manhood, but we do it for the others even. We do it for the others. We have to ask, what needs to be done to return to God? In our own lives, but also in the life of society. Yes, it is a call. It is the prophetic call here behind. And we need also to reflect upon that. What is the reason why it came to such a pandemic? What were the sins? But the sins are already very much known in our tradition. But much more is now important to recollect and to go to the sources. In quietness and in recollection, you will find the answers, says the prophet Isaiah to the king Ahaz, when he rejects him, that he should not make an alliance with Sanherib. He says to him, in recollection, in quietness, you will find the answers of what you have to do. And this we need to do. Yes, it is a call for repentance.
And this quietness, I have experienced that so many times during the past weeks. This deep quietness, that also because the world around us has become so much more quiet because of the situation we are in.
Yes.
So I think that's a very concrete way in which we can live that too. We are already at the end of our time today, as our timing is strict. So I would like to close with this beautiful poem that I already sent you, but that I think that is really worthwhile to read here in conclusion. And I will already say goodbye to you now, because after I have finished reading this poem, I don't want to say any more words, so that these words can really sink in with you. And I then already look forward to again seeing you next week at the same time. So the poem is "With Martyrs Raise Your Voice and Sing" by Reverend Kurt Reinhardt. With martyrs raise your voice and sing. We must have this one needful thing. Without Christ's feast we can't survive. It is what keeps our faith alive. As life would starve without its bread, our souls will languish with the dead. If we commune not with his flesh, or be with his true blood refreshed. God, keep us from the woeful day, when it be torn from us away. Without this feast we could but grieve, and pray the famine be relieved. If for a season we must know a hunger that true longing grow, may God in mercy make it brief, and with all speed grant us relief. Lord, let us not this gift despise, or let man tear it from our eyes. With martyrs help us take a stand for what you give with your own hand. This poem was inspired by the 49 martyrs of Abitane, who gave up their lives for the divine service on February 12th, 3004.